Welcome to another episode of the King's Couch. On this special Zoom edition of the King's Couch, I have the lovely and talented Caroline Cirone. Her artist name is Young Shadow, and she's a performance artist based out of Nashville. Caroline, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, I've been following you for a short amount of time. It's kind of one of those connections you just recommended artists on Facebook type thing. And then I got your message about your latest music video. And after watching it, I was really intrigued. And that's when I asked you if you wanted to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to talk about it. And it's an honor to be here. I've checked out a bunch of your other interviews and you do great stuff.
I appreciate it. So like every guest I have on the show, I want to go back to the beginning of where it all started. And let's talk about your earliest influences as a kid growing up. Some people are influenced, by something they watched on TV, an artist they listened to, their parents. How did it all start for you?
Well, to give it a little preface, I've been a bass player professionally for the last 10 years. And I've played for all sorts of artists from like Keith Urban to Katy Perry, did a bunch of touring and stuff, but it's pretty recent that I switched over to being a singer and a songwriter and performing in that way and being a visual artist. But so my start in music was playing bass and stuff. And, my sister, she was a guitarist and she was probably about 12 years old when she started playing guitar. And I was about 11 when I started bass, and I wanted to be cool like her, but I didn't want to compete with her. So she already picked guitar, so I picked bass. And it was just like the perfect instrument. There's just like such a nurturing thing about being like in the low end and supporting the other musicians and stuff. And I loved it. I loved bands like Guns N' Roses and Velvet Revolver. So like Duff McKagan, that bass player, he's probably like one of my earliest influences and stuff. But then I started going to like playing in big bands and stuff, like growing up, different jazz bands and stuff. So I got into that world, and I just have a very eclectic background that eventually led me to what do I do now. It's
What made you resonate with the bass? Like, why that instrument?
I think there's a lot of things going on with that. I think that, female bass players, there's something very natural about it. It's a very nurturing position. Some of the other instruments can be like very in your face and very like, hey, look at me. And like, I was a very subdued, like quiet person growing up. I was very shy. And I think that I also picked that instrument as a crutch because I wanted to be up on stage, but I was also scared to be on stage. So it's ironic now that like I already had like a pretty long professional career as a bass player. There was something inside of me that was like, I want to face that fear now. I think that I'm beyond that point of like hiding behind an instrument. I think I always wanted to be a singer. I always wanted to be up front, and like, doing crazy stuff. But I think that I never thought I could, and so there's kind of that double-sided thing going on where it's like, oh, there's so many great things about the bass, but then at what point did that become a crutch for like really evolving into and challenging myself,
And then what other instruments you play? Did that kind of start with the bass and then lead on from there? Or
I actually started on piano. I'm not really a piano player. I can actually like sight read and play pretty well on piano. I played drums. I was in the percussion section in the school orchestra. I play upright bass. I started getting into guitar a couple years back, and I'm not a guitarist, but now I have a solid enough like bass and all of the instruments that I can kind of like dabble a little bit in all of the areas, and it's like a solid foundation now for like songwriting, you know.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of started with piano. Like that seems to be like the go-to when you're a kid. For me, it was definitely piano. Someone
Yeah.
performed "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" at show and tell, and I probably told this story 100 times, but that's when I knew I want to do that. I want to be an entertainer, but I kind of think I already had that in me. Sometimes you just know, like before you even know, you know. And it's crazy watching like all these home videos that my father had put together back in the old days, like with like the little wired microphone on the 8mm, you know, video camera. And it's crazy because it's like I felt like I was always kind of destined to become a singer, you know, or just have a microphone or have my voice heard somehow. And I see that with a lot of artists and hearing their backstories and what inspires them and motivates them. And for me, like music is such a powerful like source of energy, you know. In my theory, everything's like very energy based. And I think you said you commented on one of the interviews that I did with what was it, with SJ. I was talking about being on stage and that feeling of performing live metaphysically, and that's how it feels. Like I feel like charged, like all this energy is surging through me, and it just, you can't even put it into words, like the realm that you get in when you're doing your craft live versus writing or rehearsing, you know. And I live for that. I love performing live, and I love like making music videos. And you know, I'm sure you share the same sentiment and feeling. So let's talk a little bit about like that, you know.
I totally relate. I think that all of the creative work that I do, I share a similar experience where there is something greater going on. It's like an active channeling where, you know, the music video that you checked out and stuff, like that was a lot of like Jungian channeling. Like I'm really into the psychologist Carl Jung. That's where I get my name from, Young Shadow. I like changed it so it's like easier to spell and stuff, but he had all these theories about doing shadow work where you dive into the darkest parts of yourself, the most untapped parts of your subconscious that people fear to tread, because that's where all your shame lies, all of your fear, all of the things that are repressed, where either your parents or your subculture, you know, people around you told you, oh, you shouldn't be that, that's taboo, that's this, but inadvertently strength and creativity and other parts of yourself get like stuffed down in that process too. So I dive into that space like using something called channeling, and like, you know, that song actually Waiting, that my music video is about, I actually went into like a deep meditation and then wrote the whole thing. There was this eclipse that was happening. I don't know if you remember it. It was back in like 2017, but it was like this huge deal where everyone was buying these like eclipse viewing glasses and stuff, and people were like,
I remember that.
it was like a big craze and stuff.
It was
like,
a pretty cool eclipse though. Yeah,
yeah,
it was incredible.
a once in a lifetime event. So like I'm super into astrology, and I'm like, yeah, I believe that the macrocosm of the universe, there's so much going on that there's such a vibration to everything interacting with everything that the macrocosm affects the microcosm. And that's essentially what astrology is. And it's a science that we don't fully understand yet, but you can definitely feel, you know. So during this eclipse, I did this online meditation with 40,000 other people, and they like walk you through, you know, all these different like guided meditation things. And I went deep into it for about 30 minutes, and then they take you out of it. And I just felt inspired to like just start writing, and all these words came out that like didn't come from the conscious mind. So that's what I mean by channeling, and there are different ways to like tap into it, but it's basically like keeping your ego identity out of the way, so that you can be fully creative and just let things, ideas, thoughts move through you and stuff. So I don't know if you kind of relate to the channeling concepts, or like I feel like that's kind of metaphysical,
Yeah, it's definitely that, I mean, I'm a very spiritual person, and I've actually felt like I've channeled spirits before, and I've had some experiences. My mother has similar traits. I've had some interesting encounters where you feel like a little psychic. I know it sounds kind of weird, but on stage, definitely, I feel like I channel a lot. I look at us as antennas when we do that, and we're basically one big like radio antenna for the universe. And music has that kind of ability to just open up that gate, and whatever you want to channel, you know what I mean? It's just I've done a lot of different things in my life, but like one most incredible feeling I get is from performing. I mean, I love recording, like I love writing, I love rehearsing, but I don't know what it is. The crowd, or sometimes even if there's not even much of a crowd. I mean, we've all played, slow shows before, but it's just, I can't even put into words.
Yeah,
It's just a magical feeling. Yeah.
That the conscious mind kind of turns off, and something on an unconscious level just like comes alive. And like, I don't know if you've ever had like those shows where it's like, I can't remember much about it because it was just so intuitive. I was so in the flow. I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing next, but also you kind of tapped into part of like how it brings people together. Like it's tangible. Like people, when you're in that state, like people around you pick up on it, and
Yeah.
your band picks up on it. The crowd like picks up on it, and like, oh, that's such a beautiful, like wonderful collective experience. And there's something to that. There's a lot going on there on an energetic level of how everyone's feeling each other and like just locking in together in such a profound way.
I agree 100%. I try to be as interactive with the crowd as possible. I try to add a little humor there and be funny. And again, going back to what you were just saying, it's just like, I don't even know, spur of the moment, what I'm saying. It just kind of comes to me. And they'll be like, oh, that was funny. I was like, what was? I don't even know what I just said. But, it's part of the whole entertaining aspect is, trying to keep your crowd as engaged as possible. And we're living in an era where people have the shortest attention spans. Mm-hmm. I even wrote a song called Technology based off of some kid that was staring at his cell phone while I'm like right there in his face. He didn't even know I was there for at least 30 seconds. And the look on his face was so surprised that he's like, oh my God, what is happening right now? But it stuck with me. After the set, I'm watching everybody, observing my surrounding, and people are just so busy texting, Facebooking, whatever. And it just drove me mad. I wrote a song about it, and I brought in one of my good friends who plays guitar in POD to produce the song, because I've always respected his, production skills. And the song is called Technology, and basically just kind of summarizes like the good and bad that, technology can produce. I try to use technology in the right aspects.
Like what we're doing here, like we're connecting over, across the country. That's like when technology creates connection. And like that guy that you're talking about, like that is the epitome of disconnection, You
watch The Social Dilemma, that documentary? Yeah, it's everything everything was written about what they put into that documentary. And if you look at our album cover from the album we wrote in 2017 and put out in 2018, it's centered around that person looking in their cell phone, and based off the chorus lines where their head's basically exploding. you know, and that technology is rotting our brains away. And I had Jimbo Phillips, his big acclaim is Santa Cruz Skateboards. His father created the talking hand insignia, which is a very iconic piece and still relevant today. You see it on all the Santa Cruz gear. And our clothing sponsor here in San Diego had very similar artwork. And I was like, wow, that looks like Jimbo Phillips. And he's like, well, that's because it is. He's our exclusive artist. And I was like, cool. So when it came time for us to do an album cover, I hit up, our sponsor. I was like, can you put us in touch with them? I want to hire Jimbo to do our artwork. And he nailed the concept. And now looking at our record that we wrote in 2017, it's more relevant of what's going on now than it was even then when we wrote it. And it's crazy. And it's just, our rhythm guitar player, he kind of jokes around about, oh, I prophesized a lot of this. And I was like, I don't know, maybe you did.
Oh my gosh.
You're a songwriter for the most part.
When you're channeling, sometimes that taps into the things in that way, because that song Waiting, it predicted my next 3 years, all of the things. I didn't know how meaningful that song would become, but when you're writing from that deeper part of the self, there's all kinds of things that happen. You connect with people on a different level, on a deeper level. And
hey, who killed the power? Angie. Oh, fuck. All right, and we're back. Sorry about that. We got disrupted by a blackout at my office. Ironically, we're talking about channeling energies, and then all of a sudden the power goes out. But I don't know what happened. I don't know if there was a unscheduled blackout with SDG&E, the power company out here, or what. But we're back, and yeah. I can't remember where we were exactly in the conversation before we were, interrupted.
we were talking about channeling and energy and stuff. So I feel like something out there was this conversation is done. So
Yeah.
We're going to have another blackout or something if we keep talking about that. Who knows?
And I'm all the way in the corner, in the farthest part of the building to get out. Luckily, we have emergency lights. So for any business owners out there, or if you work at a business, be aware of where your emergency lights are in case that ever happens. I remember my recording studio, that building was so old. The emergency lights we had by our, entrance were burned out. So when I did have a scheduled blackout before I could get out of the building, I remember it was pitch black. It was like being alone in the desert. It was pretty crazy. Yeah, but yeah, that was an interesting experience, and I'm just glad that we can continue our conversation, because I was thoroughly enjoying getting to know more about you and artistry.
It's so crazy because we've had to reschedule this interview a couple times for different reasons. You had something come up, and then last week I had to reschedule because my studio started flooding and stuff, and now the power went out this time. So there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on here.
But I still am I'm still dead set on the fact that we are meant to have this interview.
It just makes it more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What's interesting, speaking of interesting, is what you have on that wall behind you. What is that?
Oh, yeah, that's a tapestry. And I really loved it because it says, when it is dark, look to the stars. And, I'm super into astrology and in the whole channeling and stuff. It's something about just surrendering to nature and just letting things run its course and knowing everything's going to be fine, That's
kind of how I am. I always start at the stars. A lot of my music is written about, just trying to ground yourself and ask the universe, all those questions at night, just searching to the stars for answers. And I've done that a lot in my own personal life. I like to something, I don't know what it is, my subconscious guardian angel, whatever, spirits,
Oh,
uh,
totally.
they tell me to go to the beach sometimes and just, sit there and collect my thoughts and ground myself. It's interesting. When I start feeling very stressed out and nothing else seems to do the trick late at night, I like to go there and find solitude, listen to the ocean, and look at the stars and just collect my thoughts in that kind of fashion.
They say that like the ocean has a lot of negative ions that it gives off. So it has like a cleansing effect, like, and apparently like positive ions attract energy to you. So like when you're feeling like really overburdened and you're like, oh, like you need to just like de-stress and like clear your mind and stuff, like there's actually something more going on with the ocean, how it is like clearing away and cleaning the aura basically.
Same with when it rains. It's very cleansing at the same time. And here in San Diego, we're always in a drought. So whenever it rains, it's a special treat. And I think about 6 weeks ago or so, we had a very interesting lightning storm. And there's this mountain called Mount Soledad that I work right below. And I always go up one side of Mount Soledad and then go down it to go home. And I was leaving work one night and all of a sudden the lightning started cracking off and I already knew where I was headed and I wasn't the only one there. It was quite the spectacle. There was a lot of professional photographers,
Wow.
a lot of, people shooting video, and I got the one picture I wanted that I was waiting for, but you have a 360 sky view of like San Diego. So it was quite the treat watching the lightning crack off like all over the place.
That's so cool. That must have
Yeah.
been amazing. You know
Oh,
what
it
I saw
was.
last week there was an eclipse and I actually like catched it. Like or I caught it. I was like hanging out with like a friend and stuff and it was like late at night and stuff. We saw the eclipse happening and stuff. And it was like here, I'm Nashville time, it was like 2 a.m. ish and stuff. But I've like, oh my gosh, it was so cool to like see it. I think it was on Thursday. It's really cool.
That's awesome. How many hours ahead are you right now? 2?
2 hours.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. I've been to Nashville once and I got to tell you, like, it was quite the amazing experience.
Good.
So my mother is an amazing woman. She gifted me like the best gift ever for Christmas one year. Surprise trip to Nashville and Memphis. And I'm a huge Elvis Presley fan and a
I
fan.
can tell by your look and everything. I'm like, yeah, I get Elvis vibes.
I feel like a old soul from the 50s or something. And anyways, we spent our New Year's in Nashville a couple days. So we stayed at what was it, Opryland or whatever it's called, this big resort out there. And then got to go to the old RCAB studio, the Country Music Hall of Fame. Then we drove down to Memphis. It's probably about 2-hour drive or so from Nashville. And got to go to Graceland, stay at the Heartbreak Hotel before they tore that down and renovated it. And got to go to Elvis's favorite restaurants, get picked up in a pink Cadillac limousine. It was just pretty cool. And meet people that had met Elvis, got the full VIP tour of Graceland, got to write a message on the walls right by the entrance and on the street, and got to go to Beale Street and go to Jerry Lee Lewis's place and just experience like the soul and just it was like the best music trip I've ever had in my life, and I can't wait to go back out there again.
Oh,
My
yeah.
sister lives in Mississippi now, so she's out in Starkville.
That's not far either. Like, I mean, depending on how south, it's very drivable. Tennessee is so awesome because you can get to so many different states and stuff like so quickly and easily. It's awesome.
How long have you lived out in Nashville for?
I've been here not quite a year and a half. So I was in LA for the last 10 years. I started by going out to school there. Like, I'm from Illinois, from like the deep suburbs, like cornfields. Moved out to LA to go to school at CalArts, California Institute of the Arts, where I studied jazz bass performance. And I just stayed out there because, as at the time I was like full-time professional bass player, that was the place to be. Then now, like that I switched over to being more of a songwriter and stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, Nashville is amazing. I love the heart of this town. I've never been somewhere where they value the creative process of like lyricism so much. Like, like back in LA, it was like, okay, you've got producers and stuff, and there's a big scene for like freelancers. It was great for what I was doing before, but like I've never been to a town where like they have this thing called like writers rounds here, and like all the bars do it, where they just have like songwriters come in and they just try out their new material, and people will come to listen to that. It's amazing.
That's really cool. Yeah, when I went out there, I was really blown away at the fact that artists are working for tips essentially out there.
And good. Like sometimes,
other than I'm used to traditional guarantees, drink comps, food comps. But my buddy, that's a transplant from here in San Diego, moved out there because he was getting more into like Americana and country and stuff like that. Then his style of music was more like glam rock and kind of pop rock and stuff like that. And so he made an interesting transition. And so when I went out on that Nashville trip I was talking about earlier, he was showing me around and took me to a series of different bars.
oh yeah,
And it was quite the trip. And then I went to on New Year's Eve, I went to some big row or strip. I can't remember what it was.
Broadway. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
like a bar, like just a ton of bars, and there will be a different band on every level. Some have 3 levels, so everywhere you go there's just music. And so I do think that a lot of those bands do have a guarantee, but plus a request is like $20 per song, and they're just rattling those off. So it's like I have friends that I do really good in that scene. So yeah, it doesn't, like, not everyone does really well with it, but some people, they really like rake in some good money from it.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, you know what I mean? But it's quite the experience, especially
Yeah.
for, first time walking in and checking something out like that. And I love that. Everywhere I go, I try to find like a show, like for everywhere I travel. And I love seeing like the different cultures when it comes to music. And I was really like, I remember in college, I studied world music. And
Oh,
I was
cool.
really like blown away by how, different religions, different countries, different cultures, they all have their own styles, and beliefs behind, why they're, driven to this genre, that genre, whatever, or, they'll do it for rituals or, tradition. And it's mind blowing, and my theory when it comes to music is that music is the true key to unity. That's my one definitive quest as a musician, is to write that one song that is kind of like, We Are the World,
Mhm.
or,
Imagine by John Lennon or something.
exactly something that, everyone, doesn't matter who you are, can resonate with and
Yeah,
listen
it
to.
taps into some sort of like universal truth. And when you hear it, it's just like, oh, people just connect. And I think that goes back to what we were saying before in the other part, like back when you were in your office and stuff,
Yeah.
we were like talking about connection and stuff. And like they're like, you're talking now about across cultures, where there's just something like the magic of music, no matter where you go.
Definitely. I mean, the last guest I interviewed, for example, before you, that guy went through a horrific accident. He finally got his big break after, years of out there trying to make it from band to band to band. He joins a band that's based out of Minneapolis, and finally gets a tour opportunity, 2-month tour, and 2 weeks in, gets in a horrific accident, but like sitting there with him, he's just, it's like nothing happened. It's like his spirit is still alive, and he still is ambitious and driven and passion filled, and his whole like room was filled with his guitars and basses, and it was incredible to see that.
Yeah, that's so
And
inspirational.
yeah, and then mid interview, I see he said, oh, someone's gonna come meet me later, but she already knows that you're doing this. And I introduced myself, and I was like, how do you guys know each other? Like, oh, we used to date. I was like, so you guys are exes? And he's like, yeah, when I got injured, she was the first person to drop everything and fly out, to the city that I was in and take care of me. Hasn't really left my side since. And I thought that was like a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
And that's, the beauty part about this show, and the purpose behind it. It was, I talk about this a lot. If you go back to episode 2, for all, our viewers, I interviewed a guy named George Jimenez, aka Braveheart, who had a heart transplant earlier this year, which was ironically on my birthday. And being the spiritual person I am, I saw that as a sign. And this is someone that I go back, 16 years with, and reached out to him. And after having lunch with him, I was just so taken back by how brave he was, talking about, his journey of dealing with congestive heart failure for 10 years, and then waiting to get a new heart, and then getting the heart, and just the pain and struggle throughout it all. And he's an ex-motivational speaker for at-risk youth. So he's very empowering when he's talking to you. And it got me all misty-eyed and teary. And I was just like, I got to record this. And I was like, you need to share this, because you can help others by what you just told me. And so I get a call from him a few weeks ago. He's like, well, if you want to interview me, let's do it. And, next thing you know, like, oh, hey, why don't we do a GoFundMe? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And, it's a very gratifying feeling, helping people, especially being like a health coach. And I'm taking all the elements of being an entertainer, what I've done for years, and just kind of, blending that all into one. And, I love connecting with people. And that's what's so fun for me with doing this show, especially when I have interesting guests like yourself coming on here.
It's so great that like we connect on that level of like there being a higher purpose, because like that's like what I'm all about. That was the reason that like I shifted from being a bass player to being a songwriter. Like I think that music is so powerful, and there's been times throughout history where it's been part of a social movement or creating change, or can be used so powerfully to make the world a better place, to educate people. And like I went through this existential crisis as a bass player, where I felt like I was playing for a lot of artists and doing a lot of music that like, yeah, it was paying the bills, but it really was a lot of, it wasn't fulfilling that purpose. It wasn't making the world a better place. In a lot of ways, it was not connecting people, but disconnecting people more, where it was fueling people's insecurities, feeding people's egos, sending a bad message to, young women, or all sorts of different things. So I was like, I can't do this anymore. And that was the point where, I moved across the country, basically made a decision, like 3 days later, I was out, and moved across the country, and like, was like, I'm going to like totally change my life. I'm totally done with doing this meaningless music that is making me not love music anymore. And like, I have to devote entirely to doing creative work that fulfills this, brings people closer together, educates people, it's inspiring people. Like, it's such a powerful resource, music, that like to squander that is such an injustice,
What's your main goal behind music? Like, if you had to, like, kind of how I was talking about how I want to empower and inspire others, like What about yourself?
Well, I think for me, it's very multi-layered. Like, I really do think that music with a higher purpose where it's helping others, that's the ultimate goal. So like every song, like I have a couple songs that are unreleased, I'm releasing them as singles with music videos that they're not out there yet, but they're awesome and I can't wait to. But each piece of work is a concentration in a different theme that I'd like to provide greater awareness into. And the music video Waiting was very much about like finding my own voice. And I'm very into celebrating people's uniqueness and their differences. I've had a lot of personal struggles, like finding my voice. Like, I know you're kind of into like energy healing and chakras. I've had a lot of issues with my throat chakra, and like finding that and cultivating that has been so much work. But, I really wanted to, excuse me, highlight, the different unique ways in which people communicate. And so with the music video, I integrated American Sign Language as the form of choreography to show that people communicate differently and our differences are beautiful and we should highlight and celebrate those. And, in the lyrics too, I'm voicing a lot of things that are really about creating a better world. So some of my other projects coming up have to do with our healthcare system and other things like that, providing a greater lens for us to be like thinking about things on a deeper level. But like also, like I had mentioned, like the great purpose behind what I do is that I feel that I have to sing, and that was something I could never do before. I couldn't sing at all. I was tone deaf. I have so many things that have kept me from doing it, yet there's this desire in me. I think we all have like an individual greater purpose, and it's very different for each person. And whatever your struggles are and whatever your dreams are specially catered, but you have to go for it. Maybe, it doesn't always happen in this lifetime, but eventually that desire just keeps on growing. And like, I think that's the meaning of life, essentially, like, is to fulfill whatever your unique gift is, even if it's at first a weakness or something that you're afraid of or you think you don't deserve.
Like pretty much what I tell all my patients. And, just a lot of people come to me and they vent about how they don't have a passion for anything like a hobby. And I tell them, make a list of 5 things that you're interested in and go through that list. And you may not find something on that list that really, I always use the word resonate, but resonates with your soul. But eventually you will. And you may not be good at it at first. A lot of people get frustrated and they stop and they never go back to it. But you got to keep going. And then eventually you're going to find something that's going to connect with you, because I believe everybody has creativity inside them. Now, unlocking that creativity, finding that creative side of you is like the definitive quest. Sometimes, like I always knew that I was born to be an entertainer. And I don't know how many times I've been in like, listening to somebody lecture or like motivational, like, conference or something. And they'll go around the room and be like, so what do you want to do when you grow up? I was like, what are you talking about? I already am doing it. I have done it. I'm an entertainer. They're like the looks on their faces is pretty interesting. I remember one time, the only person to get it was an acting coach that was witnessing what I had to say. And she was very elegant and an older lady. And then she comes up to me. She's like, what do you do? And I was like, well, right now I'm in between careers. She's like, no, I mean, like, are you an actor? Are you a musician? I was like, I'm a musician. And she's all, what do you play? I was like, well, I sing in a band. And she's all, well, what do you do when you perform? I was like, I act. Oh, I see what you're doing here. And she's like, I was like, what do you do? She's like, I'm an acting coach. And I came out to find that she was a very famous acting coach. I wish I could remember her name all these years later. But it was a very interesting experience. And, I always feel like when I enter a room, like that, I just go in and like the way I'm wired, just like, I don't want to be the center of attention, but it's like I have no problem making friends or starting conversations. I go into entertaining mode. It's really interesting. And a lot of it rubs off from all the years of throwing events, throwing concerts, feeling like the Great Gatsby, like, hey, I'm going to go hide in my office now that you guys are having fun, and just kind of decompress by myself for a little while. And I used to do that a lot. I used to go in my office and write or relax on the couch and close my eyes for a little bit, collect my thoughts. And especially now as a health coach, I always try to tell people, like, you need to make time for yourself, whether it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it's healthy for the mind, body, and spirit to do that, or else we're going to just keep going until we hit that wall and the level of exhaustion and stress ourselves out completely. So
yeah, I think that like part of like what you were saying about like with your clients and how you kind of coach them and guide them towards a more fulfilling existence, like identifying things that you enjoy. And I really think that everyone has a higher purpose and a calling, and everyone has dreams. And sometimes it starts very young. Like we look at our childhood selves and we dream of being an astronaut. We dream of being a doctor. So, some people go after their dreams. Some people go after it and discover it's not what they thought it was, all sorts of things. But why so many people will say, I don't have any dreams, I don't have, any passions, is because that like self-doubt and the self-criticism and, either being told that you don't deserve that, or you can't do this, or you're going to fail, or you're afraid to fail. It just starts so young that it's still there. It just gets like so buried down, and like my whole thing, like I just turned 30, and like to be starting over with a music career after being like pretty successful and getting to do really cool things that very few people ever get to do, like how humbling that is to be like, so much of like the music industry throughout my life being involved with it told me like my career would be over by the time I turned 25. And it's like, well, here I am starting over past that. And I think that
truly
I mean, I totally agree. I think it's fucked up. I think we need to get rid of that. We need to get those people saying that out of here, because no one has an expiration date. 30 is young. 90 is young. Age is a concept. Time is like an illusion, So we need to get that shit out of there. It is not doing anyone any good. But my whole thing with Young Shadow, it's all about diving into that space of like going after the things that like you didn't think you deserved or didn't think you could do. And just like you're saying, you're like, it just takes time. You gotta like just be patient. You gotta practice, whatever. And along the process, be kind enough to yourself that you're not afraid of failure. You're not worried about getting somewhere or like completing something. It's just about enjoying the process. And all of a sudden, life is just enjoyable. It's so much richer because, it's not focused on getting somewhere. It's like being present with that passion of creating.
Very beautifully put. When I start getting a little speechless, then I've been moved.
Oh, I'm glad we can connect. We're speaking the same language.
It's yeah. So let's talk a little bit about currently where you're at with Young Shadow, what your ambitions are, how long you've been doing the project, and where you really want to take it.
I started doing it a couple years ago, but it was kind of like one of those things where I like was kind of like dabbling with it, and I was still doing my full-time bass player thing. I never had enough time to really do it. I was still so afraid of failure and had so much self-doubt and had so much that I felt I needed to improve that I always just kind of avoided it, but wanted to do it. So it wasn't really until this last year that I was like, I'm doing it. Like, this is all I want to do. You know, I just really had this like existential crisis when I'm like, this is the only thing I want to do. I have to do it. It feels like there's like no point in life if I don't do this, you know? And for me, like I'm a very visual person. I'm very much a visual artist as much as I am like you know, a songwriter and stuff. So like I come from a background of like loving people like David Bowie and stuff, where it's like performance art and visuals and fashion and all sorts of things. To me, there's like this symbolic layer, you know, of like you're sending so many messages, not just like on a literal level, but like a subliminal level, that it's just very impactful. And it's like there's something about that that is just so appealing to me. Like his whole existence was just art. He was art. And that's what I want to do. So currently I'm like working on different music videos and diving into the more visual art as well as the recording aspects. And I know I only have like one single out right now, but there's a bunch of things that are just ready to get launched and put out into the world, and then just see where things go from there.
So, yeah. Where can people, do you have a YouTube channel where people can check out your music?
I do. I have a YouTube channel. It's got my music video for Waiting on it. And that is that was a really fun project. I have Spotify. You can find me on Instagram as The Young Shadow with 2 E's. And yeah, there's going to be more coming up soon. So if you subscribe on all those, you're going to get updates right away.
I'll make sure to post all your social media links where people can follow you and your musical journey. But yeah, this brings us to the part of our show where I have all our guests, when we close out an episode, talk about a quote or empowering message that they live their life by, or that they'd like to, you know, share with our guests. What would that be for you?
You know, I've been thinking about a couple quotes recently, and one that I heard this last week that I just keep on playing over and over in my head is by Oprah, where she was like talking about, and it's very relevant to me because recently in my life, I felt like I was giving a lot to others and like not getting, I just felt very used, you know? And so she was saying that you have to give yourself so much that your cup runneth over, so that the giving that occurs is just from an overflow because you've given so much to yourself. And then when you know, keep on giving away parts of yourself and you feel empty, like that's not the spirit of giving. Like it really has to start with giving to yourself. So that's something I've been thinking about and trying to implement. How about you? Do you have a quote like recently, or?
I have many quotes. Lately, I've been talking about what the world needs more than ever is more selflessness than selfishness. There's so much divide going on, more than I've ever seen. This pandemic has just spawned so much negativity out in the world. And like this morning, I went on Facebook Live, and you can watch that video if you go on my story. It's on my wall now. Talking about this morning when I was getting ready for work, it just kind of, sometimes when I have deep thoughts, I like to share them with people, because I feel like people need to have more daily affirmations. We're in the day and age where people use social media almost in an abusive manner, where it says, like on Facebook, for example, what's on your mind. We don't always need to know everything that's on your mind. But don't get me wrong. I mean, that kind of creative space was designed for people to have a platform to connect with something. But it's been overdriven and oversaturated with too much. And we're in the era where grown men are talking and adults are talking about, I'll unfriend you if you don't believe in what I believe in. And to me, there's not enough, serenity out there. We can't agree to disagree on a subject matter. And we're in cancel culture, and they want to cancel every little thing. I mean, it's one thing about being sensitive, but we can't erase history either and eradicate like everything we've grown up with. Like, when they start calling Pepe Le Pew a potential rapist and wanting to cancel, a cartoon character, that there's something wrong with the world, or calling Dr. Seuss a racist. It's just like, I don't even know where to really start with that whole thought process. But my whole point of what I'm trying to get across right now is just that, like I said, we need more positivity in the world. And that was my whole message this morning that I went on Facebook and was sharing Facebook Live. And I also live by another quote: always expect the unexpected. You never know with what you're going to get in life.
You never know when like the power is going to go out and you need to shift your podcast interview to a different space, or your studio is going to get flooded or stuff. You never know what's going to happen. But
Crisis, don't panic, because when you start panicking and that fear sets in, you're not going to find resolution. You're just going to stress out and maybe make a bad decision or a bad choice. It's like when the power just went out, I was like, okay, how do I problem solve this? I was like, all right, I'm going to relocate and we're going to continue this interview. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Absolute pleasure. And I still want to continue talking a little more after we're done with the interview. So I'm going to wrap this interview up so I can continue getting to know Caroline Cirone a little more. And that is another episode of The King's Couch. I'm your host, Sulo King. This is my lovely guest, Caroline Cirone, aka Young Shadow. You can follow her on all her different social media sites, which I'll be posting. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. And another quote that I like to say is, stay radical. All right, well, we'll talk to you soon.